How's everyone doing? Welcome back to joining Brandon Duck Cruz and Jeff Black on another episode of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about how to lose body fat, regulate appetite, and manage hunger through energy, flux, and activity, which is just a monster of a topic, but Brandon is the sensei when it comes to it. And guys, I got to be honest. So, Brandon clients, if you guys are listening, yes, I fucked up and called Brandon Cruz. All right. I own it. I'll own it. Look,
I
thank
love
you
that
for
you're
calling me
owning
out.
this right now.
I'm going to own it. All right. And I was telling Brandon because Brandon had told me this, and I read it in a Malcolm Gladwell book. So I'm one of those people. If I hear it
Just
two
for
or three
reference,
times,
so everyone that isn't one of my clients who knows, Jeff has a bad habit of introing me on the show as Brandon Cruz. Now, this is something that I'm so used to speaking with Jeff, and we've known each other for so long. It's almost like it doesn't register that he's not saying Duck Cruz because he says it so quickly. So I had a client recently, and he said, "Do you know Jeff doesn't know your name, like your full name?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And so he told me that he calls me Brandon Cruz. Now, keep in mind, like no one in the audience knows this. I had a very good friend growing up. His name's Brandon Cruz. So I thought my client was just mistaken, had heard it wrong. So I go back to the Eric Helms interview, and there he is. Welcome to Chasing Clarity with your hosts, Jeff Black and Brandon Cruz. And I had to eat my words. So now Jeff is eating his words and
I'm a man. I'll eat it.
Yeah,
It's cool.
and he's doing it.
But I was telling Brandon. So get back to this little thing I wanted to say. They say you can only remember like 150 names. I was telling Brandon, I'm like, dude, that is a true problem. I can't remember people's last names because at the gym, I'm in contact with so many people from in-person clients to gym members, then being out in public. Like I was out at lunch this past Saturday and like three people, dude. Remember Jonathan's where I took you to?
Yeah.
Like came up, be like, oh, hey, Jeff, had a complete conversation with me. And the person with me was like, you had no clue who they were. And I was like, I just know they're members. Like they're great guys. Like it's just my mind. It's hard, and you can only remember up to 150 names. I was like, Brandon, I think it's a true thing. I just never have. So I will eat the words. It's Brandon Duck Cruz. Apologies, Brandon. I'd blow you if you were here, but you're not. So anyway, dude, how's your last 7 days been? Now I've owned that awful apology. Oh shit.
Man, it's been great. It's been a really busy last 7 days, honestly, since we recorded with Eric, which was a phenomenal podcast. And I do want to thank everyone out in the audience. I got, and I'm sure you did as well, a phenomenal feedback on that. And this episode is really going to expand upon a lot of the things that Eric briefly hit on. And we didn't go in depth because there were so many topics to cover. So this week, we're really going to dive into the weeds because I did get a lot of questions regarding exercise and appetite and how do they play. Some people have heard about misconceptions like exercise is going to rent my appetite and things of that sort. So we're going to go into that. But my week was great, man. I had, honestly, after the interview that we did with Eric Helms last Tuesday, I had 3 other podcasts that week. So I was stacked with podcasts. I've been onboarding new clients all week. And then I also had one of my newer guys. So this is a long-term client of mine, Ryan. We've been working together for close to a year, but we did his second show ever together. He got second in his class, second in the novice, but he took second to the overall winner. I mean, the guy was lights out. And my guy came in, on point. I was super proud of him for this experience. Obviously he's disappointed because he wanted to win, but he looked phenomenal. He came in so improved from his previous package, and he had worked with a big name coach and for his first show and had a really bad first experience to the point that he didn't know if he wanted to compete again. So he took a much different approach to this. I put him through a primer phase, which is something that you and I have spoken about in detail on this podcast before. So we had a lengthy primer phase, and then we went into a prep, and we just approached this more as a lifestyle. Because I always tell my guys, like, a big mistake that I made, Jeff, I'm sure you made this at some point in your competition career, and a lot of people that I've worked with, and keep in mind, I've worked with, up to the level of IFBB pros, both males and females. And what I've seen is a lot of people make the mistake of thinking bodybuilding is their life and it's the end all be all. So what ends up happening is when the show doesn't go their way, or when an injury happens, or when they can no longer compete, it's almost like they've lost such a large portion of their life, which I understand because last summer I was injured. I was unable to train. Fitness is a major component of my life. It's my career and it's my greatest passion within life. However, I always say bodybuilding and fitness in general should be a part of your life, not your life. It should add to your life, the quality of your life, not take away from it. And yes, there are going to be some sacrifices. So for instance, I'm in a dieting phase right now. I'm hungry. I'm dealing with, side effects of dieting, but I'm also growing through the process. I'm becoming a better version of myself. For me, dieting helps me with productivity because I know there's only so many hours that I have energy until I run out of steam. So I'm up at 3:30 every morning, getting my stuff done. I'm on client check-ins. I'm making sure that I schedule podcasts early, like Jeff and I do on Tuesday afternoons, so that I can do things when I'm in my greatest state of mental energy, mental currency, and cognition. And so with this client in particular, his first show, he took it on like he was a pro, and he approached it in a his coach kind of had him approach it in a very extremist manner, which gave him like a bad taste in his mouth. So I really tried to change the paradigm, shift the paradigm on him, both in terms of our approach to the sport in general, but also his mindset towards the diet. So just seeing his growth, both physically and mentally, was a great process. I actually went to the show in person, so I got to meet him. He's a client from Pittsburgh, so he lives about 7 hours away from where the show was located, but I was able to go see him in person, meet him, meet his family, phenomenal people. So that was a great experience. And other than that, another diet update. I'm 10 weeks into the diet, getting close to my photo shoots, which will be at the end of the month. And I'm feeling it. You know what I mean? Yeah, I never complain about dieting, in a general sense. There are people that's all they do is complain about their low energy or their hunger or this and that. I feel all those things, but honestly, I really try to focus and embrace the process because I know that this is another opportunity to test myself. I don't need to do this. I've gotten lean more times than most people will ever get in their life. I've been on national level stages. I've been in magazine covers. I've done all that. This is not about me proving myself to anyone else. It's about proving myself to me and seeing that I can get back to where I was previous to my prior surgery, because I really haven't dieted down to this state since 2020. So, this is a process of self-discovery and never-ending improvement. And I look forward to the next couple of weeks. I'll tell you guys, I'm digging at this point. Calories are low. I have a very adaptive metabolism, which we'll probably have to do a podcast on because it's different than metabolic adaptation. It's more of like the spendthrift and thrifty genotypes that Eric kind of briefly hit on last week, but we didn't get to go in detail. And this is something I get a lot of questions about. I've worked with a lot of clients over the years that have adaptive metabolisms, meaning that they downregulate. So they got to eat far less calories than they would expect to be able to drop body fat and especially get into those essential levels of body fat, which are kind of where I'm at right now. So, just digging, enjoying the process, embracing it, taking it. I always tell my clients, take it one task, meaning one workout, one cardio session, one step count, one, work task at a time, one day at a time. And we just keep putting our best foot forward. But how about you, Jeff?
Dude, that was cool. You got to meet your client and stuff. It's always neat when you get that experience.
Absolutely. No, we've had a great relationship. I really pride myself on the relationships that I'm able to build, even in an online capacity, because as and the audience knows, I've been online training for close to 10 years at this point. So I've been able to really, think about our relationship. We built that online before I ever went to go see you in person. And now I've stayed at your place. I went to multiple conferences with you. We've traveled to other areas together. So, I'm very fortunate that I've been able to cultivate really great relationships online. And I appreciate everyone out there that's in our community, from the Chasing Clarity community, within my own team, within the PEC, like all the people that I've been able to meet within this industry. And then the opportunity to meet them is phenomenal. And this is another thing you might want to hit on, the whole fact that PEC 7's on the book. So, fill us back in.
Yeah. So like, we've confirmed Austin Stout, Lauren Conlin, Scott Stevenson. I'm waiting to hear back from confirmations on 2 others. I believe Vince is going to be speaking, Vince Pitstick, Jason Theobald, myself, and Jeffrey Sue. I'm actually going to talk about, I think I'm going to be fucking weird and talk about copper and iodine and just talk about them in general and stuff like that and just go down like a whole rabbit hole. But it might, the space is funky right now to me. It's a person, the Excellence Cartel, we're kind of known for rushing in like that application because of Scoob, Jason, the integrative side and things like that. Kind of get that to be known to a lot of coaches, especially through the PEC. And the more I go down this road, I've just kind of like, you discover that you can still fix hormones, but people still have like brain fog, or they still have like energy issues, or they still have things that make you kind of go, are you more hypothyroid, or what's going on? Like, where you're deficient? And copper and iodine I've actually used with clients, and like they've noticed improved quality of life away from their symptoms after like hormones hit. So it makes me go like, should I have gone this way before I went that way? And that's my assessment as a coach, and someone who does like the functional side of medicine. But the biggest thing that I think the industry is kind of like playing a Russian roulette would to a certain degree is like, if you do these things, you will be fixed, quote unquote. And it's like, there's so many habits that are broken in people that I just like, unless they bitch that the symptoms are intolerable, I'm like, let's nail your sleep, let's nail your steps, let's nail your diet. And then we'll go down this path over here. Sure, let's maybe use some ginger root and apple cider vinegar because they're cheap to help with your stomach stuff. But at the end of the day, like, you can assault them with a bunch of stuff. I'm just kind of like put back, and I pulled back on some of that, and I pulled back on some of the initial stuff I was doing. And I think that it's kind of getting a little cloudy to the point when I know I'm getting asked questions in my gym. People are legitimately confused. So I'm kind of like, are we confusing people more than we're trying? So it's always what's going on because it's marketing, at the end of the day, I get it.
I think that's part of the mission of this podcast in its entirety, because I'm a big person. I'm always about principles over protocols. I think that there's a lot of sexiness behind marketing a protocol, whether it's a gut health protocol, whether it's this, it's that, it's a hormone fix. And, what people are selling are these quick fixes and shortcut solutions. And it looks good. It sounds good. Hey, I'm going to fix this in 8 to 12 weeks. But that's not how the human body responds. And we cannot predict that as coaches, no matter how much experience we have. So I think we have to tread lightly on what we know, and then also really double down on the fundamental principles that we know work, whether, and I'm not saying they work, across the board, but we know 9 out of 10 times these things, these big rocks, nailing nutrient dense foods, making sure that you don't have micronutrient gaps, hitting your fluid intake and making sure you have adequate hydration. And that does not just include your water intake, that's your sodium, your potassium, your calcium, all your electrolytes, ensuring that you have fruits and vegetables, adequate fiber intake, good bowel movements, your steps, your physical activity, your training's on point, your sleep, your stress management. These are all things that are not sexy. They're the big rocks, but often we see people skip over those steps and they're neglecting the big rocks that could really, move the needle in the direction that they need to go first and foremost. And instead they're going for, the $500 health, supplement stack, or the nootropics, this, that. Believe me, I come from the supplement industry. I'm very well aware of all this stuff, but I think a lot of times people will go for what sounds sexy and like it's going to give them immediate results, not knowing they'll take a gamble because it's other people out there are marketing a quick resolution to the problems that they have, and they're really going after their pain points rather than doing the deep work, both in a physical and mental capacity, and really working on some of the things that they need to address. And it's going to take longer. These things are not going to rectify themselves overnight. If you're a highly stressed type A individual that suffers from anxiety, that has dysregulated sleep patterns, that has poor relationships with food and with those around you, that's not going to undo itself in an 8 to 12 week quote unquote protocol. However, by really addressing those root cause issues, you're going to be able to solve so many other things and not spin your wheels or waste your money.
I agree. I'm just, you go through stuff, and that's the part about being a coach. You learn and you adapt. That's why I like it. But other than that, I'm in a mini cut like you. I'm in week 2. I'm already down 4 pounds. I think I'm down 5 now. Doing my book writing. I leave next week for Austin. So I'm excited about that. We actually record a day early next week. I have it in your calendar. Wink, wink. But I set a goal that I wanted to write 50,000 words with a stretch goal of 60. And then I ended up getting 72,000 down.
You hit it out of the damn park yesterday.
Thanks, man.
Congrats, my friend.
I appreciate that. So I think it might actually tidy up around like between 85, 95,000 words. Wow. Because I still got like a little bit more to go. It's it's interesting because they don't want us to bring any of our writing material to Austin. So
was there any reason for that? Did they give you a specific reason?
Only thing I could think of is they want us to think about this through a different lens, perhaps. But my story is unique. Like, I don't have like characters. It's like me, my mom, my family, friends along the way, and just kind of.
It's your life story. This is a memoir.
Yeah. So, but they want you to still structure it in this way. So I'm going into it with a very open mind. Like, okay, at the very least, that if I go back and when I re-edit the book, I'll have a different lens to look through it. So I'll have the original, and then I'll have the one after I see it. You know what I mean? And then I can kind of go, well, which one do I want to? Because if anything, it's just going to make me better. But I will, use the information. You might see me teach a class based on what I learned and what I already know. Because like I like writing. That was something we were talking about. With before we went on air was, I just don't post a lot of like educator content anymore because the book literally
has consumed that aspect.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, my business hasn't suffered for it. And I've just sat back and I've watched people create good content like yourself. And, for every good piece of content out there, I see some interesting
No,
content
but
on the
I
other side.
almost feel like I do create content on a daily basis. That was a personal commitment I meant to made to myself in 2017. I said I will put out one good piece of information on Instagram. At the time, it was Facebook, actually, on Instagram or Facebook every single day, because I was the type of person that went on the forums every single day in high school through college, and I gathered information from your Alan Aragons, from your Lane Nortons, from Jason Theobald. I used to interact with Scooby back in the day on the boards, from Skip, from Scott Stevenson, all these guys. And so I wanted to give back to the community in that capacity. But really, what I've realized over the years, and this is why, if you heard what I mentioned about last week, I did 3 additional podcasts. I really don't have that much time, but I'll budget 45 minutes to an hour to do a podcast, or we do this weekly. And the reason for that is I find that my greatest utility is in long form content, because I am someone that there's a lot of context to what I speak about. And that's due to the fact that I have so much experience as a coach, as do you. So it's hard to put, within the confines of a couple hundred words, to be able to hit, I don't have a niche population. I don't have a target audience. I'm not trying just to work with 35-year-old moms that, have 2 kids and are metabolically adapted. Like that's not my niche. I don't have a niche. I work with people, everyone from Lifestyle Lisa and Gen Pop Gym to your IFBB pros that are trying to get back to the Olympia level stage. So it's like I have a wide spectrum of people, and I like that because I like being a generalist. I don't want to be a specialist in just one area and become narrow-mindedly focused on just one thing. And so within that, I love getting on podcasts and being able to just have an open conversation. It stimulates me intellectually. Like last week, the highlight of my week was that conversation with Eric, because we were able to dive into stuff that I've researched, that I've looked into, that I've spoken with clients about. But then I was able to get a researcher's viewpoint on it. And it's not just me reading the text, not just me spending hours on PubMed looking into it. It's like, let's go back and forth. Let's talk about the environment. Let's talk about biology. Let's talk about, different homeostatic and hedonic mechanisms of appetite regulation and hunger and all these other things. And that kind of stuff excites me. And I like the long form format, because I'm never going to get that type of engagement or that type of discourse on an Instagram post, despite the fact that I get dozens of comments. I have a pretty interactive social media profile. It's not engaging enough. It's not intellectual enough. It's not deep enough. And that's not what the platforms are for. So it's podcasts like this that you and I are really able to get into the weeds, man, and also provide a lot of clarity to those out there that are wondering about this stuff like we are.
Yeah, no. That's why we're here. That's why we budget out our time to have a conversation. But otherwise, man, my last 7 days of good business, good. I had a little weekend fun, couldn't complain. Cooked tacos for Keegan and I. That was pretty smoking. But let's get into this. So today we're going to talk about how to lose body fat, regulate appetite, and manage hunger through energy, flux, and activity. Now, I want to go ahead and say we have Brandon on the Excellence Cartel like 2 years ago, and he had talked about
no, so 2 years ago was metabolic adaptation. I did a series on that. Last summer we did energy flux.
There was the energy flux. So Brandon come on to do energy flux, and I was kind of like bored, like fucking around, like maybe I'll do a show. And he was on there and he was talking about steps. I'm like, all right,
no, well, you know what? It actually was before that. We did a podcast after, but we did an IG live.
Yeah, that was the IG live. That was it, because it was all right around this time. It all occurred in like this little window. We'll summarize it there. So I did an entire prep. I read a study that said, hey, if you walk within 10 minutes of eating, it helps blunt your blood glucose. I was like, I'll just manage my BGs. We can see what goes on here, So literally after every meal, I would go take a walk, and I would do 20 minutes. I had this loop I liked. I was getting sun every day. And for an entire 13 weeks, if you watched on my Instagram, I literally just stepped and I didn't adjust my food the entire prep. And when I knew my thyroid was downregulating, I was hitting it with more iodine. I was hitting it with more thyroid boost. There were things I was doing to keep that thing going along, because I knew that would downregulate. But I came in pretty peeled, like I'm notorious for. I was shredded head to toe. So it kind of sold me. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this conversation and having the conversation, because it's one that's been thought about a lot. But I want to get into the first point, which is the misconception that exercise increases appetite. So I know this, the more I took steps, that was the least hungry I'd been any prep. Like I was not miserable at all. It was very weird. Like I was kind of like, because Jason Theobald and I, he's my coach, and it's like a collaborative. Like check out, like, hey man, I still feel like I only touched my food, dude, and I'm not saying that because I'm a pussy. I'm saying that because like I just not hungry. I'm it's right. And he was like, oh, okay. Like literally, it was the craziest thing. But I had told him that I would never do another prep without steps. So the moment that the mini cut happened and I got cleared on my hip, I went right back to steps. But I want to bring that to a point because a lot of people think, well, if I move more, I'm gonna be hungrier. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Usually when you're sitting around, you're hungrier. But usually a person who's dieting for a physique show knows that to be true above all else. But Brandon, let's get into the misconceptions, man. I know you got the research on it and your thoughts and stuff like that. So what do we got?
So I wanted to start on this because this is something that has long been a misconception. So we often hear, that exercise, and there's this notion out there that exercise increases our appetite and our levels of hunger. And this is something I've heard other coaches say, and then they'll reinforce it by saying how they've felt famished after a workout. But it's important to realize that correlation does not equal causation. So just because we may feel hunger after completing an exercise session like a workout, it doesn't mean that exercise directly stimulated and caused that hunger. And in reality, we see in the peer-reviewed literature that exercise has the advantage of sensitizing us to satiety signals, which is what you were just referring to, Jeff. So we see that in countless lines of literature. And when we even look at comparative studies, looking at active versus sedentary individuals, we see that those who are less active tend to those that are less active tend to consume more calories than those who are more active, because being sedentary actually causes a dysregulation in our satiety signaling. And we have evidence that shows that regular exercise is one of the most effective interventions to correct this dysregulation, because it actually happens at the level of the hypothalamus, which, if we go back to our metabolic adaptation masterclass, that is pretty much the master controller of our satiety hormones, our hunger hormones, and all those other metabolic adaptations. So exercise not only helps us lose fat and maintain fat loss from the energy expenditure perspective, so from calories out, but also helps on the calories in, or the energy intake side, by helping us control our appetite as well. We also have studies that literally isolate individuals between exercising conditions and non-exercising conditions to see the effects that exercise has both on our appetite and our hunger levels. So, for example, there was a study by King that looked at data from 17 crossover studies, I believe. I believe it was 17. And what they did was they monitored subjects' appetite responses in conditions where they had exercise prior to meals and then when they weren't actively exercising. So in each study, they had individuals do a bout of either moderate or high intensity aerobic training, and then closely monitored their hunger scores, their ad libitum calorie intake. So ad libitum calorie intake pretty much refers to the fact that they allow them to eat to satiety. So eat as much as you want or as little as you want. And then also they did blood level measures of their hunger hormone ghrelin both before and after training to see the difference. And when looking at hunger before, during, and after exercise, they found that subjects' hunger levels were actually suppressed during exercise as compared to when they were not exercising. Then when they looked at the subject's ad libitum calorie intake in the 1 hour after exercise, and then for the rest of the meals throughout the course of that day after exercise, when allowing them to eat to fullness, they saw no impact on exercise and calorie intake, even when they compared it to the days that they didn't exercise. So it wasn't like on the days that they did this intense exercise intervention, they ate more as a compensatory mechanism. They didn't even compensate for the amount of calories burned in that session. And then when they analyzed the subject's ghrelin levels through blood work, they saw that on average, exercise suppressed ghrelin levels both during and after exercise. So on average, they found that exercise suppressed the subject's hunger levels during exercise and then didn't impact them after, meaning exercise didn't increase or decrease hunger levels post-training. So this whole misconception, or this notion that exercise automatically increases appetite, we see that that's not the case. And we even have a recent study that was done last year by Tobin. And this one looked at the effects of acute exercise on appetite and energy intake in both men and women. And so really what they were looking to do was to isolate these variables. What does an acute bout of exercise do in comparison to not doing anything? And they actually did multiple conditions. So in one condition, they had them just come into the lab and it acted as a control. So what they had them do was they just sat down and relaxed for 45 minutes. In the second condition, they had them come in and perform 45 minutes of aerobic training. So they did cardio essentially. And then in the last condition, they had them come back into the lab and do 45 minutes of resistance training. And what they wanted to do was see how each different exercise bout would impact and influence their appetite ratings, their hunger levels, their craving scores, and then also their ad libitum intake, where they were when they were presented to a buffet style test meal after the exercise bouts, in comparison to the condition where they just had them do no exercise. And they found that exercise, both in terms of the aerobic training and the resistance training, neither of them impacted hunger scores or their actual energy intake. They didn't eat more calories to compensate for the exercise, even when compared to when they did the inactive control session. So even when they compared, them coming into lab and doing nothing, just sitting there and then getting a test meal, compared to coming in and either doing 45 minutes cardio or 45 minutes resistance training and then having that test meal, there was no difference in how many calories they ate. So despite what many claim in terms of exercise increasing hunger, we have countless lines of research that disprove this. And this is because when we're active, we're actually able to recouple our natural hunger and satiety cues with our natural needs for calorie intake based on what's called homeostatic hunger. So this is our natural physiological drive for energy. So when we go from being sedentary to moderately active or above, we see a resensitizing of our appetite and satiety signals that helps us not only get leaner, but manage our hunger and appetite easier, which is important as, like, if you really think about it, hunger is usually the largest barrier to dietary adherence and success. And this is the one reason why I'm such a proponent of increasing activity levels and the high energy Flux lifestyle, which we'll go into, as I find that many of my clients who struggle the most in terms of their hunger and their dietary adherence are those that are most sedentary. It's always my office workers. It's always the people that don't hit their step counts. It's always those that are seated most of the day that tend to struggle with hunger. And if we really took a step back and said, all right, exercise increases hunger levels, we would think that those that are sedentary would have the least amount of hunger, but that's not what I see both in practice, and we don't see that in the research. And so, this week I really wanted to cover the benefits of how energy flux and increasing activity can help with the modulation of appetite regulation and can help us change our body composition and maintain a leaner physique through its appetite regulating effects.
Well, and I think it's important to define what energy flux is, Brandon.
You got it, my man. So essentially, simply put, energy flux is our state of energy turnover in the body. And it basically centers around the relationship between the amount of energy we consume and how much we expend through all forms of physical activity, including both our intentional exercise and our daily physical movement. So this concept basically refers to how we achieve our state of energy balance through our intake and our activity levels.
Okay. And what are the different states? Are you just saying that they're the activity levels and so forth, or can you wrap that?
No,
with
so
one of them?
absolutely, yeah, I can expand upon that. So let's think about it. When someone has the goal of staying lean after completing a fat loss phase, my primary focus, and I know this is the same case with you, is to get them back to maintenance calories so that they're in a state of energy balance, where their energy intake and their energy expenditure are evenly matched, as that's the first step, as we discussed in previous episodes. That's the first step in reversing the metabolic adaptations that we sustain through a deficit. We need to get back to energy balance. That's where we see a restoration of both metabolic, hormonal, and mitochondrial adaptations that are incurred during a deficit. But here's the thing. We can reach the state of energy balance using one of two approaches. We can use a high flux approach or a low energy flux approach, but the state we achieve is dependent on the amount of activity we do and the amount of calories we consume on a daily basis. So just to compare and contrast, if you were to do it, so if you're in a low flux state, you'd be maintaining your current body fat and body composition by eating a low amount of food coupled with low activity levels, and thus you'd have a low energy expenditure. So you'd be burning a low amount of calories per day. And this is honestly the situation I find and I encounter most new clients in when they first contact me, especially if they have a history of chronic dieting or they've just finished a fat loss phase. And this is due to the fact that when most people try to get lean, they take that typical eat less approach. So their calorie intake goes down, it's gotten lower. We know as a result of metabolic adaptation, their total daily energy expenditure has dropped. And with that, their metabolic rate has slowed down as well. Then, in addition to that, which is one aspect many overlook, but we've covered multiple times, their NEAT levels have also dropped significantly. And as a result of being in a prolonged deficit, they're now in this low flux state where they've been putting less energy into the system in the form of food and getting less energy expenditure out as a result of being in this massive deficit. And this is what I call, and you and I have discussed this, more of like a restriction based model of maintenance. Meaning, if you were to try to stay lean using this approach, you're going to have to restrict your calories long term. There's no other way to do so. You're not burning a lot of calories and you're not consuming a lot of calories. So if you just go right back into eating a lot without increasing your expenditure, you're going to be in a surplus, you're going to regain fat. So the issue with this type of approach with being in low flux, besides like some of the metabolic detriments and things of that sort, is that it's really hard to maintain. Most people, I would say the vast majority of people are not going to be able to do this long term, which is one of the reasons why we see weight regain being so prevalent after finishing a diet, and why we see people regain fat pretty much as quickly as they lost it after they finish a diet. Now, on the flip side, if you're in a high flux, high energy flux state, you'd be maintaining your current body fat levels and body composition by eating more and being more physically active, which will allow you to maintain a much higher calorie intake than the client who was in this low flex state, as the increase in activity is keeping you in energy balance. So you're able to stay lean while eating more. And being in this high energy flux state pretty much is more of an abundance based model of maintenance, meaning you're putting more energy into fueling your body, fueling your training, and fueling your physical activity levels. And as a result of that increase in fuel, your body's able to burn more calories. So we've spoken about the fact that eating more in and of itself raises your resting metabolic rate. Eating more in and of itself increases your total daily energy expenditure. And this is, my way of leveraging this system. And when I speak about this concept to others and to clients, I have them think about it as putting more energy into the system in terms of eating more nutrient dense food and then pulling more energy out of the system through movement, which is why I often just simplify it down to this phrase where I use, and I just say, we're going to eat more and we're going to move more. So the biggest difference, whether you're in the low or the high energy flux state, is how active you are and how many calories you're eating to match your level of activity. And we can stay lean through either approach, but based on my experience, and both with myself and with countless other clients, and Jeff's experienced it himself, I prefer the high energy flux approach. I prefer to make this a lifestyle so we can eat more, we can live a more fulfilling life, rather than this chronic dieting scenario where you're chronically restricting yourselves and you're feeling the effects of chronic calorie restriction constantly, which is something that we're all going to have to experience. To get really lean, you're going to have to calorie restrict. You're going to have to go into a deficit, but this is for a short, compressed period of time. It shouldn't be like a long-term way of approaching being lean and staying lean.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, I just want to follow up your point. It's very weird, like, to get paid to tell people sometimes, like, I need you to do less. Like, I got this kid who, he's not a kid, but younger guy. He's actually picking up the new single for FGL, Florida Georgia Line, when they broke up this country band. But anyway, yeah, so he hired me and got his management team convinced he needed me back as corner because he looked his best when he was with me. But anyway, so he drums all night, downtown, and he sings and does set. And I was like, bro, your problem is you just don't eat enough. And then he starts eating more, and voila, it's like magic and things like that. And
everything upregulates.
Yeah, but like I see that a lot. Like, you'll see women who will do like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, for example, right? They'll do that like 2 or 3 days a week, plus weights 4 or 5, 6 days a week, plus not eat. And I'm just like, can we just cut all this back? They just kind of like have you just eat what
it's
you're
about doing the
eating.
right things. A lot of people overdo the wrong things. They overdo the chronic calorie restriction. They overdo the over restrict during the week, and then over binge, overeat during the weekends. It's like
you're doing and that creates a lot of inflammation mess. You know what I mean? Well, you'll see blood sugars just get blown out. And once that happens, it sometimes days before people's BGs get back to optimal levels. Like I've seen it just like take forever. I'm like, they'll drink 1 bottle of wine on the weekend and it's like goodbye Sally for 4 days. You know what I mean? Like it's just like wild to see sometimes. But we want to talk next about how energy flux and NEAT impacts our ability to regulate our body fat levels and body composition. So as I alluded to, when we first kicked this off telling my story, it definitely was a big deal because I think prior preps, I had been more active. And then I know sometimes when I wasn't as active, I would find myself pulled in. It would be like I would see no changes in the pictures and there were harder preps, and I kind of have adaptive metabolism, but for whatever reason, like the steps was a big game changer. And I liken it to I think it helped with my mental health more than anything, just being that active. And I think it put me in a better position to like frame things better if those things didn't bother me or piss me off. And, and I was very much living a very stress-free life. So I think it was a lot of factors that went with it. But I want to hear kind of like what your take is, Brandon, and like how you teach it and stuff like that. But I tell everybody, like, the more you walk, the more you're going to eat, the better you're going to feel, and the better you're going to look naked. The end.
Hey, I think we can end the podcast on that one.
Yeah, no shit.
I got all this experience, all this
Yeah.
research, but I can't say it any better than that. Hey,
Yeah, no
live
shit.
a good life, eat a lot, move a lot, look great naked. That's all we need.
Yep.
Good night, folks.
Yeah, good night. But go ahead and hit it, man.
All right. So when it comes to losing body fat and maintaining a lean physique, engaging in high levels of physical activity help us to make up for the reductions in energy expenditure that come from decreased NEAT levels during a diet. And I find that many dieters, and this is something we've spoken about multiple times on the show, they get so caught up on their metabolism, quote unquote, slowing during a diet that they completely neglect what's going on with their NEAT, which is why we've done full episodes on this. We've done full episodes on both NEAT and metabolic adaptation, as these are concepts that many don't pay enough attention to or don't fully understand. So if you guys have yet to listen to those, please go back into the vault. We've done full podcasts on NEAT, on physical activity, as well as metabolic adaptation, which I'm sure you'll find really helpful on those topics. But the fact is, many don't realize that the reductions in NEAT account for up to 85 to 90% of the decreases in energy expenditure that we see with metabolic adaptation. So in a study by Rosenbaum, they actually looked at how much of a reduction in total daily energy expenditure dieters who had lost at least 10% of their body weight sustained, and saw a 500 calorie decrease in the amount of calories they were burning per day just from that amount of weight loss. So then researchers broke down this 500 calorie reduction into specific components to see what aspects of their total daily energy expenditure were impacted the most from that weight loss, as they wanted to see whether they were burning much less calories per day due to a decrease in their metabolic rate or activity levels. Because up until this point, there's a lot of like misconceptions, and there still is. But this research was done, a good amount of years back. It just hasn't been brought to light as much as probably it should. And they found that those who had lost 10% of their body weight experienced about 100-calorie reduction in their resting metabolic rate as a result of weight loss. So it wasn't that large of a drop as you'd expect. A lot of people think they lose hundreds of calories just from their metabolic rate, but even with a 10% reduction in total body weight, which is a significant amount of weight loss, like these individuals were 300 plus pounds, so that's at least 30 or more pounds. But even with that, they only lost 100 calories per day. So that's, a half cup of rice less that they couldn't eat a day, essentially. However, when they analyzed the rest of the components that contributed to their large degree of metabolic adaptation, they found that the dieters' physical activity energy expenditure, which in this study exclusively came from NEAT because they didn't have them do any exercise in the lab, had decreased by around 400 calories per day. So specifically in this study, NEAT accounted for 80% of the total drop in the amount of calories they burn per day, which is in line with the majority of the research we have on fat loss, which shows that decreases in NEAT are the most impactful when someone loses weight, and body fat, as being in a deficit, causes us to subconsciously downregulate our activity levels and sit more, slouch more, and compensate more. And these are a lot of things. This is why I'm so big on steps, because there's so many compensatory mechanisms that kick in during fat loss and during an energy deficit that we're not able to account for. But steps are the one thing we can track. We can actually, put some cognitive oversight on. So this is why increasing energy flux through increasing steps and movement to increase our NEAT levels is so beneficial, because none of us can or should try to stay in a deficit all the time to maintain a lean physique year round. But if we don't do something purposely to offset this downregulation in NEAT that comes along with dieting, we'll never be able to maintain our body composition improvements without being in a state of constant and chronic calorie restriction. And then we also see in research that those who maintain higher levels of physical activity have a lower body fat percentage. So if you guys remember last week when Dr. Helms was on, we briefly hit on one of my favorite studies, which is actually how I got Jeff to try the energy flux model, my high energy flux model, which is the Amish study by Bassett, which demonstrates how high levels of physical activity result in better body composition maintenance. So for those who aren't familiar with the Amish, they're pretty much an agricultural based farming society. And they do most of their tasks and their activity by hand, and they don't rely on a lot of the things that you and I do. So they don't like look to modern day conveniences. They don't drive cars. They don't use dishwashers. They don't use elevators. They don't use washers and dryers. So they live a much more active lifestyle than the average American. And they also tend to work active jobs. So they're manual laborers. So, like, for instance, the guys in the community, they tend to work as farmers or woodworkers or construction workers, whereas most of the females are homemakers, they're mothers, but they do a lot of gardening. They're still physically active. And so this study was specifically done to examine the relationship between someone's activity levels and their metabolic health. And within this study, they looked at 98 subjects living in this Amish community. And so the Amish are pretty much a perfect example, and this is why I always point to the study, is they're pretty much a perfect example of those who live the high energy flux lifestyle and reap the benefits of it, as when researchers analyzed their body fat measurements and step counts over the course of a regular work week, they found that on average, the males had a body fat percentage of 9.4% body fat and a 0% prevalence of obesity. And the females had an average body fat percentage of 25% with a 9% prevalence of obesity. But as Eric mentioned last week, they also had an average of 7 kids per female. So that definitely impacted these measurements. And so, you have to take into consideration. But either way, we're seeing incredible metabolic health. We're seeing, very low percentages of average body fat. Now, mind you, this is a range. So that means that some females could have been 15% and some could have been 30%. And we're equating to 25% as an average. But with that being said, they're in much better health than your average American. Now, when they examined the average daily step counts of the Amish, they found that males averaged 20,000 steps per day, and females averaged 15,000 steps per day, 6 days per week. And then on Sunday is their only day off from work. And on that day, even on their day off from work, they still average 10K steps. So on average, when you do the math on that, the males average around 18,500 steps per day. And then the females average around 14,000 steps per day across the week. Now, if we were to contrast that level of physical activity with people in modern day society, we see that the average American actually only hits around 51 to 5,200 steps per day. So the Amish maintain this low level of body fat and low rate of obesity prevalence with literally no intentional exercise or dieting, and are a quintessential example of individuals living lean and at the lower end of their intervention point, like we spoke about last week with the body fat set points. And they're thriving in our obesogenic environment due to their lifestyle. They're moving more, they're eating more. You know what I mean? So they're living this high flux lifestyle and reaping the benefits from it. And now when it comes to, so that's mostly, in relation to how does physical activity influence low body fat percentages or maintaining a lean physique. But even when we look to weight loss maintenance, having higher levels of physical activity are highly beneficial. And now we know that when it comes to dieting for fat loss, 6 out of 7 individuals, if you actually look into the research, will be successful and will successfully lose weight. But between 80 to 90% of those same individuals will regain all the weight they lost once the fat loss phase is over, which is why I've always thought that our main focus should be on body composition maintenance once we've reached our goal body composition and body fat level, as this is what many struggle with most. And when it comes to weight loss maintenance, engaging in high levels of physical activity on a daily basis is one of the number one characteristics of those who have lost a significant amount of weight and successfully kept it off. So we even have research from Ostendorf and colleagues. They recently actually just released a study where they looked at physical activity levels and total daily energy expenditure in weight loss maintainers. And when looking at those who had lost an average of 30 pounds and kept it off for at least a year, so this is significant weight loss for a significant period of time, they found that successful weight loss maintainers averaged over 12,100 steps per day. And due to this increase in activity levels, the weight loss maintainers had a total daily energy expenditure, so the amount of calories they burned per day, were 300 calories higher than those who were not maintaining their weight in that same study. So they had a higher amount of calories burned, and they were also able to eat more and maintain the results. And the researchers also examined what factors correlated most with the differences they saw in their total daily energy expenditure between the groups, and found a strong correlation between an individual's daily step count and the amount of calories they burn per day. So it wasn't that they were doing intentional exercise. It was literally they were more active, and that's what increased their total daily energy expenditure, which is why those who were successful were able to maintain significant weight loss despite increasing their calories and no longer being in an active dieting phase. So it's important to pay attention to this correlation between physical activity and successful body composition maintenance, because when we lose a substantial amount of body fat, our body increases our drive to eat. And anyone out there that has went through a dieting phase and gotten lean will tell you that. Jeff and I can confirm that. I'm dealing with it right now. He's going to be dealing with it soon. So we notice that our hunger levels increase. And this is one of the main reasons why so many people regain all the fat they've lost or even more after a diet, because this increased hunger leads them to eating more calories than they're burning. So they go from being in a deficit, they're in a fat loss phase, they're in a deficit. So all of a sudden eating more and going right into this massive surplus. So they suffer from this body fat overshoot where their body starts to readily add fat mass because we regain fat tissue quicker than we regain muscle. And this is where maintaining high levels of physical activity is helpful, as it acts as a buffer for the increases we make in calories after finishing a fat loss diet.
Yeah, I have another question that I wanted to ask you. So how do we tie this into, or how would you, okay, so you went over all that. How does energy flux and like physical activity, and is like NEAT included, I guess, in this, play a role in appetite regulation?
Absolutely. So when we look at engaging in high levels of physical activity, we know that it increases our energy expenditure. So, you know, we know that it's going to make us burn more calories, but a lot of people only focus on that. So yes, we're increasing our energy expenditure, which it does allow us to eat more and maintain our body composition. But that's not all it does. And it's really important to hit on this. So I'm glad you asked about it, because we have to realize it's not just about chasing calories. I always try to get this across to clients. I'm not having them chase a calorie burn, especially because we've went over this in previous podcasts. Our first initial series, we even went over how activity trackers are so off. Like some activity trackers overestimate calorie expenditure by between 25 and 93%.
It's true.
So we're not trying to chase calorie burn. We're trying to increase activity for not only the energy expenditure component, but also the appetite regulation component. So getting into a high flux state goes beyond just the calorie burning, aspect when it comes to improving and maintaining our body composition, as having higher levels of physical activity impacts appetite regulation and our ability to properly match our calorie intake to our calorie expenditure. So we not only get the benefit of being able to eat more, but we're also able to be more in touch with our natural hunger and satiety signals, which leaves us less likely to overeat. And the impact on hunger and appetite regulation has been directly shown in studies where they compare the effects of maintaining fat loss in a high flux versus a low flux state. So, for example, this was actually a study that I hit on, if you remember, during my presentation for the PC last year. There was a study by, I believe, Paris and colleagues, where they had subjects lose approximately 7% of their body weight during a dieting phase. And then they put them into essentially like a 3-week diet break where they brought their calories back up to maintenance, and they had to maintain their new lower body weight and leaner body composition level. And once they had these participants in energy balance, so at maintenance calories, for 3 weeks, they put them into a crossover trial where each person went through two conditions. So they put them through 4 days in a high flux state, then put them through a washout period, meaning they were back to energy balance. And then they went to 4 days of a low flux state. And in the high flux state, they were able to maintain their body composition, eating 3,200 calories per day due to increasing their physical activity levels. And then they had the washout period. So they gave them 4 days where they did nothing. They just maintained their normal intake and their normal expenditure. And then in the low flux state, they had them maintain their normal levels of physical activity. So they had them drop down their activity levels, which caused them to have to eat 2,400 calories per day to maintain their body composition. So despite their intake being 800 calories different in the high flux versus the low flux condition, their body weight remained the same in both. So this was a laboratory controlled setting where essentially they were monitoring them every single day. So it wasn't like they ate 800 more calories and their weight started climbing up. Nope, they were at equal energy balance. And in both the high flux and low flux state, they measured their subjective hunger levels and their metabolic rate. And they found that every single subject reported less hunger and a greater sense of fullness in the high flux state, despite engaging in higher levels of physical activity. So if exercise really did increase their hunger levels, they were doing a ton of exercise, they did not experience that. They actually experienced the opposite. But they also, another benefit that they found from this, and this is something that you and I have hit on, is they also found that their resting metabolic rate was higher in the high flux condition. So they not only got the benefit of feeling greater fullness, greater satiety, and probably better dietary adherence over the long term. Because think about it, this was only a 4-day trial, so it wasn't like they were likely to go off the bandwagon, but they also had a higher increase in the resting metabolic rate. So they had been in a dieting scenario, then they got them back up to energy balance to restore a lot of the metabolic adaptations, but then they even saw an increase by increasing their calories and increasing their expenditure. And we see in countless other studies that higher levels of physical activity result in better regulation of hunger and satiety, as being active provides us with better satiety response post meal. So essentially, what that means is we feel full quicker after a meal, which lowers the likelihood of us overeating, which is especially helpful for staying in a state of energy balance and adhering to a calorie budget, both during a diet when we're trying to get leaner, but also after the diet when the goal is to maintain a leaner body composition. So the best way to understand the relationship between energy flux and appetite regulation, and this is kind of how I explain it to my clients, because sometimes it doesn't make sense to them. They say, well, I'm moving more, how am I going to be having better appetite, satiety? It's kind of counterintuitive until you really look into the research, until you try it yourself. Like, I remember explaining this to you, Jeff, and you being like, all right, well, I'll try it. You're an open-minded individual. You've also have a lot of experience, but a lot of my newer clients, first of all, they're scared to eat more. So that's the first issue that we got to get over. That's more of a psychological thing, but we cannot separate psychology from physiology. So I have to get them, bought in first and foremost, but then I also have to show them, I'll show them some research, but I'll also tell them about my own anecdote, as well as dozens and hundreds of clients that I've done this with already, that essentially how it works is there's a relationship between energy flux and appetite regulation. And within that, the relationship is pretty much between physical activity and energy expenditure aspect of energy flux and how it acts as a regulatory system. So when we engage in more movement and maintain higher levels of physical activity, we have a better regulation of our appetite and better maintenance of our body fat and body weight. Yet when we engage in less movement and we become sedentary and we have lower levels of physical activity, we suffer from a dysregulation in our appetite and our satiety signals, which makes staying lean more difficult. And a great example of that is the modern day obesity epidemic. We see people that far exceed their energy requirements, who are extremely sedentary. They're seated all day, but they're snacking. They had this dysregulation where they're not feeling full, and they're suffering maybe from leptin resistance, like Dr. Eric Helms hit on last week, or they're just not getting those satiety signals because they're so sedentary. It's like, if you're ever in an office scenario, you'll notice that you mindlessly eat, but you're not getting that same fullness response. And we see that those that snack actually have less fullness, and they have a less likelihood to tightly regulate their appetite, because it's almost like those snacks that they had, they're not registering to their body as energy being taken in because it was eaten in a mindless manner. So the same thing happens when you're sedentary or you're less active. It actually just regulates your ability to modulate and manage your hunger levels, and it makes staying lean more difficult, or even getting lean more difficult, because when you're less active, you have to eat, you're burning less calories, and you have to eat less calories just to continue losing weight or losing body fat. So our ability to regulate our appetite and control our intake starts to improve once we get to a higher level of, a level of higher movement that is more in line with what we were evolved to do daily, basically. As if we think about it like evolutionarily, like just think about this from like an ancestral perspective, we were meant to move, which is why and how the high energy flux lifestyle can help us get lean and stay lean, because we evolved to be, bipedal, individuals and organisms, where we did things by foot. We went out and got our food. Like, we were used to high levels of physical activity. That's how we stayed in energy balance and stayed with a healthy body composition, and didn't suffer with a lot of the sedentary, both from a physical as well as a metabolic perspective, issues that we have now, like obesity and insulin resistance.
It's funny that like that Amish study, like, isn't put out in the news or anything, talking about, guys, if y'all just would like be more active, you probably won't have to go to the doctor for every single pill, out there. It's very interesting, when you kind of like step back and you really think about what the modern life is doing to people. It's just a very toxic environment, from the food choices to everything in between. Because I'm like, oh, woo woo, the water is killing us too. So what can I say, man? But that was a great episode and all that. I know that's your wheelhouse and you enjoy talking about it a lot. My summary of it is, I always tell everybody, like, look, it works. Like, that was one of the things I wanted to prove with my prep on it,
And here's the thing with this. Yes, I have research to reinforce this now. I've done an article on Alan Aragon's research review about this. I've spoken on countless podcasts about this. I've went to the PEC and presented at your own seminar on this topic. But here's the thing. The only reason that I dug this deep into literature on it and I have all this evidence and all this research is because I utilized it in practice first. I looked into the NEAT literature that's from the 90s. And so I was originally very well versed on NEAT, and we've covered that in great detail, Levine's research and all that kind of stuff. And I know that like the back of my hand. However, I was seeing it in play in person, and I was seeing it in a different aspect than a lot of the NEAT literature. If you actually look at the NEAT literature, it looks at a different subset. It looks at overfeeding studies where NEAT can help dissipate some of the fat gain in overfeeding and in purposeful overfeeding studies. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, in metabolic adaptation, a lot of the focus on NEAT is on the downregulation. But there was very little literature at the time when I was looking into step counts in NEAT where people were utilizing as a method to not only get lean, but to stay lean. And it wasn't until 2018 that actually energy flux as a term was actually conceptualized. So I don't know if I mentioned this on this show, but I know I mentioned it on one of the podcasts I was on. When I did the research review for Alan, I actually couldn't use a lot of the research that I said today, nor that I've utilized in all the podcasts I've done over the years, because in the Bassett study, there was no such thing as high energy flux. They're a modern day representation of energy flux, but it's not within their actual study. And so it doesn't say, energy flux in anything because it was done in 2004. And the actual term energy flux didn't come into the peer reviewed published literature until 2018. So I was already utilizing this years prior. I was doing step counts with my clients. I was seeing results. And it wasn't until years later I started looking at all these different, areas of literature, kind of like what Eric was speaking about, where he's combined metabolic adaptation with REDS or relative energy deficiency, with the female athlete triad, with all these different lines of literature, and kind of cross-pollinated them and taken the lessons that he's learned from each of them and combined them into a model that's helped bodybuilders and competitors that he's worked with, as well as the research that he does. But within the research review context, when you go for peer review, like when I submitted my article to Alan, it had to be in line with what said energy flux. So the only citations I could use, actually, I was able to use the Ostendorf study that I cited today. However, there was a lot of stuff that I couldn't use that is a prime example of energy flux, but because it doesn't say it in the actual paper itself, it isn't reinforcement. But here's the thing, guys, like I saw this in practice. So even if this wasn't, peer reviewed and evidence based, it wouldn't matter because I've seen it work countless times over and over again. And that's really all the endorsement you needed. Like I gave you some research, but at the same time, I was like, listen, Jeff, what do you know me for? What does Jeff Sue always say about me?
What, the Step King, I think, or some shit?
I'm always lean.
I'm always lean.
I'm a walking representation of this. And so this is something I've seen work in myself, work in clients, everyone from lifestyle to competitors. And so this is something that it isn't a one-stop shop, but it is an intervention that if you are someone that's sedentary, just increasing your energy expenditure through NEAT, through increasing energy flux could be highly beneficial. And it's something that I've really found to be really applicable, especially to my female clients, because they've lived in a chronic state of calorie restriction. They've been that chronic yo-yo dieter. They have felt that they have to continually eat less, and then exercise more with these HIIT classes and just smashing themselves. What they don't realize is not only are they metabolically adapted, like we spoke about in previous week's podcast, where their energy expenditure is down regulated, but they're also sitting more, compensating more because they go so hard in the gym for that 1 hour throughout the day that the rest of the 15 other hours, they're seated and they feel terrible and they're not getting the results they want. Or if they do get to the finish line, say they do finish that 16-week fat loss phase, it's almost all for nothing because the dietary recidivism rate is so high where they regain all the fat that they've lost quickly after finishing it because they couldn't maintain either what they did, the approach that they took to get there, the calorie restriction and the over HIIT training and the over, training and things of that sort, or they can't deal with the hunger and the appetite. So this is a way to kill two birds with one stone. And it's an approach that I suggest, everyone out there, give it a try.
Hey man, like I said, I did it. Proof in the pudding. You can scroll back to May, June, July 2021. But dude, that's it. We ain't got nothing else. We kicked that one pretty good. Guys, if y'all listen to this, we really appreciate the reviews. Keep ranking us on Spotify. Keep ranking us on iTunes. If you guys got suggestions on how we can make it better, hit us up.
We really, like honestly, I got to say, we appreciate the feedback, all the questions that you guys DM us. This is really how we kind of spin off and do this is why we've been able to do series, because I have weeks of collected questions. And also oftentimes when we do release a new episode, someone will have a specific question on something we hit on. So I went into some of more of the studies that we covered with Eric, but we didn't go in depth, or some of the topics. Like some of our feedback was, well, I thought exercise or physical activity increases, appetite. So today we addressed that and we went into more of the nuances of it. So
Right.
that's really our goal, is like the title says, chasing clarity. We're trying to provide clarity and you clear up some of the misconceptions, the myths, and the misunderstandings and misinformation that's out there on a lot of complex topics.
All right, man. Dude, I'm all for it. That's why we're here. Like you said, help everybody out. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you guys got anything, hit us up, let us know. In the meantime, I'll catch you next week, dude.
Sounds good. Later,
Peace.
guys.